Well, hello to all of you gathered here and to everyone around the world who's watching the live stream. My name is Dr. J.D. LaRocque. I'm the president and CEO of the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, also known as NIFTY. We're a global nonprofit organization that works around the world and in the U.S. to help young learners from underserved communities learn how to start businesses. And it is my great pleasure to have with us here today a very esteemed panel to talk about our topic today, the learning relay and lifelong learning. So let me introduce them first. We have with us Yusuf Al-Benyan, the Minister of Education for Saudi Arabia. Welcome, sir. We have Minister Deepu Moni, the Minister of Education from Bangladesh. Welcome. Kevin Frey, my colleague from another esteemed entrepreneurship education organization, Generation Limited. Kevin, nice to see you. And Ulrika Biesert, the Chief Human Resources Officer for Inca Group, also known as IKEA, in the Netherlands. Welcome to you all. Let me set the stage by just saying that I love the metaphor of the learning relay, because we can think of that metaphor in two senses. First, we're all acknowledging that education is no longer something that just happens at one point in time and at one stage in life. So we can think about it in terms of the learner, himself or herself, going through a race of education in stages that, of course, starts with primary and secondary and perhaps tertiary education, but now, in today's day and age, might encompass top-up education in the form of short-form programs, or workplace-based education, or other types of credentialing and skill building as one gets older. And then there's another way we can think about it, well represented by the panel here, which is the idea of a relay race and a handoff, not just from schools, but involving employers, governments, members of civil society like the organizations that Kevin and I represent, and of course the learner as an individual. Now we have some data that we'd like to show on a slide that I think will really elucidate both of these ways of looking at the learning relay. So this is from the World Economic Forum's new report that was just released yesterday. And you can see here the top 10 skill priorities for the coming years. Well, it should be no surprise that number 3 is a new entry on the list and has debuted in a very high position. AI and big data is changing the way we think about education and lifelong learning and is going to be a massive skill need going forward. But it's also important to recognize that skills that have always been important, namely the top 2 here, analytical thinking and creative thinking, nonetheless remain important skills for all learners to develop, both in formal education and in lifelong learning. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that despite the need for that skill building and our awareness, our growing awareness of the need to build those skills, there is nonetheless a persistent mismatch between the type of skills in education that learners are receiving along the way and what employers and workplaces need. 49%, just under half of people work in jobs unrelated to their formal education. Obviously, this creates an even greater imperative for alignment between education systems and industry, and to think of new ways to go beyond formal education as we know it and really build out a true system of lifelong learning. So let's jump into the conversation, and we do want to engage you with your questions. I do want to reserve ample time for that, so start thinking and we'll get to those questions before long. But Minister, you yourself, before you came to your current post, were a leader in industry. What did you learn there that informs your current thinking in your current role as Minister of Education around lifelong learning and the need for it?
But first of all, I'm really pleased to be part again on visiting the WEF. I have been engaging with the WEF for the last 20 years, but this is my first time really coming with a different hats. I am part of the other 49% who came into the education without really. I think it's my reflections on today. This is a very important topic, and I think why the WEF is really a good platform for it, because we are learning all collectively from great talents really across the globe, and the WEF is the best platform for us to do this. Now, from what I have learned, being in the business, coming to the governments and specifically to very important functions, that it's most of the time leaders are really focused on their shareholders. but in fact you need to focus on your entire stakeholders. And I think this is very important elements in our learning. If you look at the challenges right now lifelong learning is facing with, we have an issue around basically access to educations. In order for you to allow everybody gets into it, there is a requirement to really engage with the entire ecosystem. There are some issues around works and life balance. Basically, it's a culture and values that has to be generated within the ecosystem in order for you to achieve it. There are a rapid technology advancement, and the education system is lagging behind. And these are all challenges that I have really tried to capture from the learning from the business comparing to education system. Now, in the kingdom, I think our Vision 2030 is coming with a very important pillars. And that's, again, I would like to classify it into the ecosystem required for lifelong learning. The first one, we looked at a very important, vibrant society. And by itself, it requires a lot of things in order for you to achieve it. The second pillar, you need to have really a thriving economy. So you need to have a very minimum economical transformations in order for you to have long life learning. And the third element is also ambitious nation. You need to have a nation that has always looked at it from a long-term perspective. So in my view, what I have learned, that you need to look at the entire stakeholders rather than only your own specific shareholders. And there are a lot of elements that we need to take into account in order for us to achieve it. You cannot demand a lifelong learning where the values and cultures are not really there for it. There is a policy need to be in place in order for you to incentivize people to continue. And I do believe also technology is going to play a major role on that aspect. Again, I can go on, but I know that we have limited time. I have to listen to my colleagues because I'm learning also from them today.
Thank you so much, Minister. And Minister Moni, I know you have a very active agenda for schooling and education in Bangladesh. How are you thinking about lifelong learning?
Well, thank you. And as you were asking him about his experiences, and he said he falls under that 49%. I don't know which side I fall in actually, because I trained as a doctor, a lawyer, and a public health professional, but I do politics. And so whether I'm in the 51% or 49%, I don't know. But what we are trying in Bangladesh is that we know that, and we live in a world of knowledge economy, and it is transforming. This economy is transforming the demands of the labor market worldwide, and manufacturing processes are changing very fast at an enormous speed, and also the modes of services. And this advanced machine learning and AI, as you just mentioned, it's revolutionizing the work landscape. So we need more skills, more knowledge, but our traditional education system, that is not equipped to deliver that. And so we are in the midst of transforming our education system, where the whole issue is that we are now we have learners. We don't call them students anymore. They're learners, and they will constantly be learning. And there comes this lifelong learning, because now it's not just primary, secondary, or tertiary. Things are changing so fast. Whatever we learn in our universities now may not be relevant 5 years down the line. So learning to learn has become more important. Being more flexible, being more adaptable, and learning those skills, especially those which we call now soft skills, that are so important. So we are changing our whole system, keeping this in mind so that lifelong learning can be there. And it will take a little time, because, as I said, you cannot impose things on societies, but people have to remain relevant. They have to, because there is already a mismatch between the set of skills that they acquire in educational institutions and what the demands are on them at their workplace. And that is also changing at a very fast pace. So the realization is there that we have to adapt and we have to keep on learning. And there comes lifelong learning. So I'm sure that we're, as a society, as a nation, we are preparing ourselves for that. And but we do have, I think, our traditional, before we were colonized, our traditional learning systems actually had that capacity, had given that capacity amongst learners, but we switched to a system a few hundred years ago, which I think sort of constrained us and restrained us within a certain kind of expectation. And now maybe we can go back to our old traditional, very old traditional systems where you learn throughout your life. You learn from your gurus, you learn from your elders, you learn from the society, you learn from the environment, nature, from everywhere. Absolutely learning 360 degrees. That was there. Yeah. Thank you.
That is such a great point to make, because we often talk about lifelong learning as the new thing. And yet, you just made a vitally important point about how indigenous ways of thinking about education and learning may be what we have really needed after all. I'd like to come back to the point that each of you has made ultimately about building a constituency for lifelong learning, creating the conditions for that to be accepted. Let's drill into it with our additional panelists. Kevin, I know you want to share some thoughts about artificial intelligence, which of course has been a big topic at this conference and at the annual meeting. Tell us a little bit about what GenU does, first of all, and how you are thinking about AI and these new technologies that are coming to the fore in the context of lifelong learning.
Sure. So Generation Unlimited is a public-private youth partnership housed within the UN, brings together some of the world's biggest companies, UN agencies, governments, together with young people to skill and connect them to opportunities for employment, for entrepreneurship, and for social impact. I just want to pick up on some of the things that the minister said here. I think what AI has done is massively accelerate a transition that was already happening within education on the skills we're developing. I think if a lot of us think about when we were in school, we learned how to generate knowledge. We learned how to do research, to synthesize that knowledge and produce it in a report, in a PowerPoint presentation. Maybe later we learned how to code. Well, now there's AI. So the marginal value of creating knowledge, of generating knowledge, is going to zero very, very quickly. And what that means is that is not skills that the workplace are going to value anymore. So we now have to very quickly fast forward to say, what are the uniquely human skills that are left now post-AI? And how do we cultivate those? And I think, Minister, you started to speak to many of them. I was in a conversation with Adobe just a little bit earlier this morning. The value of creative skills, uniquely creative skills that are human. But also, I would say, communicative skills. So interpersonal skills, social emotional skills. As humans, we solve problems together, but we do that vertically, horizontally, in teams. So how can education system transform the skills that we're creating for this new kind of post-AI world? Couple ways that I think AI changes the game very positively for this lifelong learning relay. I know you were at ASU GSV, JD, which is maybe some other folks were there in San Diego a couple weeks ago, the world's leading EdTech, JobTech conference. I got to demo a couple of AI tutors, and I was blown away. We know from research that high-dose tutoring, one-on-one high-dose tutoring, is one of the best ways to improve educational outcomes. Now, and I demoed one that works on a 2G phone using ChatGPT, every young person will have a personal tutor that can accompany them through their entire life, who gets to know them. The demo I saw, he told me to pretend that I liked soccer. So I said, I typed in, I don't understand inflation, and I like Manchester United. And it gave me a personalized story about inflation using soccer players from Manchester United. So imagine this personalized tutor that travels through your life with you and learns about you and how you learn. Absolute game changer going forward, delivered via 2G to every young person on the planet. I think that's tectonic. The second thing would be a career coach. Similar to that young tutor, Every young person can have a career coach, a chat GPT and a generative AI career coach telling them which skills they need and which jobs to be connected to. So I think we're in a new world.
This idea of personalization is an important point because, Minister Moni, much like your comment about the system of education that you were forced to adopt after colonization, we think of traditional education, Western educational systems, often in terms of batch processing of students in very familiar ways across many different countries. It looks much the same. And yet, I imagine that a key driver of the need for lifelong learning is that ultimately you need education in order to really fulfill yourself, in order to not only fulfill yourself economically and in terms of remaining competitive, but also to actualize yourself as a person. So thank you, Kevin, for bringing in those examples. Now, Ulrika, as an employer, I imagine that you are thinking of yourselves as a learning organization. Tell us about that. What types of skills are you prioritizing for the sake of your business? What types of needs do you see need to be developed in your employees?
I think as a starting point, what we can see, and I think all of you have discussed that now also, is that we're going from a knowledge-based society to a skill-based society. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you can have a knowledge, doesn't mean that you have skills to actually realize it in your everyday working life. So I'm a Swede, and in Sweden we love meatballs. So if I take that as an example, I might understand a recipe and I might remember it in my head. So theoretically, I might know exactly how to do those delicious meatballs. But in reality, I need to practice. I need to test, I need to try, I maybe need to fail, I need to adapt to actually create something that people want to buy and we want to eat. Then I think that it's so rapidly changing. We heard that here also. I mean, the whole landscape of learning, education, upskilling, reskilling is in such a speed, the need. And we also heard earlier here the mismatch between the skills that is needed and the skills that we're holding. And I believe here that the lifelong learning, and you asked about if we have that in our culture, I think we have had that, but we have not had a name for it. So we talk about everyday learning. So how can we learn by building in reflections? When we're sitting here today, I think if we just stop, we will learn something today, and we reflect, and we will actually be a little bit wiser when we leave this room. That goes for every co-worker. So how can we work with the teams and actually developing by that? But I believe there is two components that is critical for learning, and one is curiosity. So how do we create a mindset of curiosity, of openness, of daring to testing and trying, actually be a little bit playful, and that will also create creativity. So I believe curiosity is a key component. But the other one is about feeling comfort and confidence. And self-confidence, I think, is a critical component of being a learner. And what I mean here, as a company, an organization, you need to ask yourself, what company are you? What culture do you stand for? Do we allow people to bring their full self to the work environment? Equality, diversity, inclusion is a prerequisite for that. But do I, as a coworker, feel safe enough to express, I don't know, I want to learn this, why are we doing this? I think that is components that is very, very important to create a learning culture. I also think that the notion of recognition is important. So all of us, we actually thrive when someone sees us and we feel, you're talking about feeling self-fulfilled, but also getting recognition, for instance, for my leader. So how do we have a constant feedback culture so I grow by that? And then my personal view is that when you really grow as a human being is when you feel that you accomplish something, when you feel that you have succeeded. So the question then is, how do we push ourselves to be a little bit on the non-comfortable side, tiptoeing into the unknown, and by that growing? And my last comment would probably be, I love the word learner, I'm a learner. So I believe it's very important that each of us are fully responsible for our own competence development and learning journey. Having said that, I think that the leader in the organization has a super critical role, but also the organization, the company as such. How do we provide systematic reskilling and upskilling programs to support? So what I'm trying to say, it's a systemic way to developing competence and learning.
Thank you. And I think that your point emphasizes something that's been spoken to multiple times so far, which is, when we think about AI and the new technologies that are coming on the scene, sure, they're immensely helpful, but they work from a base of knowledge that already exists. So Kevin, back to your point, and Ulrika, you just emphasized it, if that's going to be our new reality in an education context, in a work context, in a lifelong learning context, then perhaps we'd better focus ourselves on those things that that machines still can't do, at least right now. And all of the things that you're speaking to are emotionally based, they're psychologically based, they're about the connections that human beings have with each other, and that how that plays an important role in being productive in a workplace setting. Again, it goes back to self-efficacy, and ultimately it goes to something that, again, as of yet, AI can't do so well, which is to be generative. That's what creativity is all about. Let me ask a couple quick questions for anyone to answer, but get ready, audience, with your questions, because I'm going to turn to you in just a moment. So let me ask, so here we are. We represent the lifelong learning chain that's supposed to exist. Governments, civil society, employers, and yet, as that statistic from the WEF report shows, there is a break, there is a disjuncture between what we know we need and the alignment that currently exists. Comment for us, ministers first, on where you see an ability to create a better match between employment, between employers and education systems and civil society.
Well, I think this is a very important topic, specifically since I joined the ministry. I have really spent quite quality time just for me to understand what exactly it takes for us to do it. And I think the only way for us to achieve it is through a public partnership, private partnerships really set up, where ministries, they have to come up with policy and regulatory environments. There are employers, there are also education institutions, and there are elements that has to be and a clear, important components. But also in the same times, individuals themselves, they have to take a lead to own their career. And I think this is very, very important. And again, has to come with the education system. I have learned from my previous role that if you want to do anything, you need to do a reverse engineering. And I think in this case, we need to go back into the market and make sure what the market needs in order for us to have the institutional work with education system in order for you to have the right output for them. But I need to alert you to very important elements. We cannot also rely heavily to the fact that we're just going to wait for the market to determine what type of output the education system will provide. In my view, universities has a major role to innovate new business. And if I'm going to wait for only market to tell me I've been in the business for more than 3 decades, not necessarily we all the time we do the right business. So we maybe even select the wrong business. So therefore, this is really a collaborative mode. Business requirements, in the same times, institutions like university and education system has to come up with the culture for learners or students to come up with their own drive, not waiting for somebody else to really direct them. In the same times, also we need to come up with a new innovative business, because if you look at most of the industry that we talked about today, it came out from university labs. And I think it's very important to take that into account. Thank you.
Who else would like a word on this question? Yes. Minister.
I totally agree with him.
Oh.
I totally agree with him. You see, that is why we're we're emphasizing on industry academia collaboration, because we ask the industry, what do you want to see? What knowledge, what skills, what set of, what attitude do you want to see in your workers, in your employees? And if we can involve them in developing our curriculum, and then also involve them for internships, apprenticeships, then there could be a better match. And also, as he said, that a lot of industry can come out of the universities. So when universities are doing research, it's not just research for the sake of research, but they must do research, they must innovate, they must incubate, and then also commercialize that, so that from the research. There is this match and there is this connection between the two. So I think that is very important.
It's so interesting that both of you are not saying, in this context that we're grappling with today, let's throw away our existing institutions and start fresh. Instead, you're saying the opposite, that we need to lean into existing institutions, even those that may have contributed to the mismatch, to create a better match. And it's your call for a greater communion between employers and the universities, for example, is a very important call. Let's get our other panelists in before we turn it to the audience.
So I think if we can push the analogy a little further, the relay race analogy, where the baton gets dropped all the time is where actually Generation Unlimited focuses, which is on the learning, turning, school to work transition. That's where there's a really big mismatch. And I think there's things that ministries of education can do. I think there's things corporates can do. I think there's things young people can do to improve that space. If we, again, play with the analogy, of course, a good relay race has you running side by side as you hand the baton off. And I think the private sector has to run side by side with the public sector as we talk about the skills mismatch. I know Bangladesh is actually a global leader working with private sector to ensure that really strong transition for young people. So while we advocate for ministries of education to work with private sector, what we called on from the private sector in a paper actually in the Harvard Business Review last year that co-authored with a professor from the University of Toronto and Bob Moritz from PwC, we actually called on corporations to move some of their training from behind what we called the corporate firewall. We understand there's competitive advantage and you don't necessarily want to move your training, but make that training available. It's world-class training, it's industry relevant. Companies, can you look at your internal training and say, what can we make available for free to the young people in our country to prepare them for that transition? And then the last thing we advocated for was make sure young people are at the table. When we're talking about young people and their transition, they need to be there. They know what they want, and we need to be taking their input.
Thank you. Ulrika?
I really like that. Ask people what they want and need, and they're very clever, so they will help. I think on an overall level, I think we need to make learning more accessible, more relevant, and more equitable for everyone. And yesterday someone talked about that during the Industrial Revolution, people actually were left behind. I believe we should have a commitment, no one should be left behind, so that is a starting point. Then I believe if you represent the government, I think we need to think how we can transform the education system to really early on in childhood train what we call the soft skills. How do I learn to build sustainable long-term relationship? How do I actually develop communication skills, creativity, innovation? What technology can't do? And maybe those soft skills will be the core skills into the future. I believe if you are representing the education or academic, I think the curriculum needs to be super simplified, but also how can we make sure that the curriculum are in line with what the labor market needs, short and long term. And then for the business, I think we need to step up a bit and be even more relevant, but also systemize the way we are supporting the co-workers to be relevant today and tomorrow. So the radical collaboration that I'm hearing all of us are talking, I think that is key. So isolation and silo is not working anymore. We need to really radically collaborate.
Radical collaboration, what a great term. Let us turn it to the audience. We see a number of hands up, and if I can ask the WEF team to give me the 3-minute warning, that will also be very helpful. Let's go to this gentleman in the front. Since you're there, let's go there, and let's go here, and let's go there. Yes,
good
sir.
afternoon, everyone. My name is Mohammed Kafaji from Al Faisal University, Riyadh, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The title of the discussion today is a lifelong learning. And certainly lifelong learning, it doesn't start at the university. It starts further, too far back in life. And we have a saying in the Arab world, Mr. Binyan will understand it, اطلب المهد اطلب العلم من المهدي إلى اللحد, which literally translates into seek knowledge from cradle to grave. Now, my question to the panel is, most of the discussion so far is at the university level and the business, and how much we can bridge the gap. My question is how far we need to go further back into the family and the early years of the children when they start learning, And we should not also forget, there are early years, children are being captured by all those social media and thumb devices which sort of mask or model their brain into a certain way of thinking. So the question is, how do we tackle this dilemma? Where do we start, and how do we improve that from the early stages?
That is such a great question. And you know, I'd like to speak to this because at the organization I lead, we actually start our work on entrepreneurship education as young as middle school. Why? Because we are trying to educate students to develop the habits of mind, creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, future orientation, ability to manage risk, that they need to recognize early on so that they can develop the idea that they can be creative. So you have put your finger, sir, on a really important point. Let's get in. I think, Minister Money, you would like something to say on that?
No, fine.
Okay.
I would like to say it quickly.
Yeah.
You know, we can spend days to tackle your questions. But the first one, I think we need to do a big change management programs. People understand that learning is not only in the fence of schools or universities. Second, I think we need to take into account that focus on our curriculum, where it's not just knowledge base, it's also cultural base and skill sets base. So people you build on their DNA from the beginning. A third, continuous campaign within the institutional universities, also from pre-K to high school, that your school is not just by the time you get the certificates continuously. Then this is the role of private sector in the same times that by the way, I have participated with the WEF in the study during my previous role that when graduate from university leaves after 4 years, they will be absolutely out of knowledge that they learned from school. So this is just a skill set that's required for you to learn in order for you to continue learning. But I agree with you. This is a continuous journey. Sorry.
Any quick additional comments from the panel?
I fully agree what you are saying, and I think that children in the nature are actually learners. They are curious, they are testing and trying, they're non-judgmental. So how do we build in that in a school system early on? And you're talking even about parents. I think it's absolutely right that we need to change the mindset and have a growth mindset that is actually lifelong.
Sir.
Thank you very much. I'm JJ from Japan. And then my takeaway from your panel is the most important skill for the future is maybe not the creativity, but the learning skill, I guess. Yeah, that's what you say. So, and the problem, my question is how the low-performing students or the employee can enhance the learning skill. The reason is, on the right-hand side, I'm teaching a business school, and those people, they have no problem for develop learning skill. My left-hand side, my family business is a high school for all the dropout children, and they really have a difficulty to enhance their learning skill. So I just want to get some hint on how those low performers can develop a learning skill.
Fabulous question. If we need to inculcate lifelong learning, what do we do about those learners who need to learn how to love learning? What are your thoughts?
I will jump again.
$1 million question.
I think we are normally afraid of unknown, and I think AI should be a great platform for us to really enable access to those individuals. Two, we need really to make sure that we have a very strong gating system how to recruit teachers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Teachers' role is very, very important. Teachers' role is crucial, absolutely crucial. Many of us, I would say that those of us who are in this room, if we think about our childhood, the subject that we like most is most likely that we had a very good teacher for that subject. So it depends on how that person engaged you to learn that subject. So it is crucial. And also making learning enjoyable, joyful, that is so important. So we're trying all these things, and also not confining learning within the four walls of classroom. So learning everywhere, learning with joy, and you nurtured that curiosity, the natural curiosity that children have, and not be judgmental. And people, if they learn from very early on to collaborate, so that's why our new curriculum that is trying to do exactly that. That children will, the teacher will introduce a subject, but then students will find for themselves all the information that they need. They will do their research on their own. They will form groups, do things, do presentations. Obviously, not all of them will perform equally, but if they find joy in it, then they will at least learn more than what they would have learned in the traditional system. And I think that is important. And teachers' role now will become that of a guide or a facilitators. So I think that is one way of doing it.
Thank you. Ulrika?
No, on your question, my first thought is we really need to understand why. So why is those people you're talking about not interested in learning? And I think half of the answer sits there. Then I think we need to realize there's not one way to learn. So in our company, we're talking about there are many ways to grow and really providing opportunities that is not only standardized. So what I'm trying to say is that you can make a career that is lateral, you can make a career that is horizontal, you can grow in current position, and the best way that I see that we are growing is that you might change, unit, department, cross-border, cross-country, and by that you're really developing and learning as well. But the first question for me, why don't you want to learn?
Do you have a definition of what success means in school?
That's an issue.
Yeah. I think this is very important for us. Not necessarily everybody pass. It's going to contribute.
Thank you so much. Let's see if we can get one or two more questions in. We have
Thank
more
you.
questions than we have time for, sir.
Thank you.
And
My
then
name
we'll
is
go
Kok Yam. I'm from the Singapore Skills Future Agency. I'm really enjoying the rich perspectives that the panel is sharing. Not a fan of menu, but let's agree to disagree. Yeah, my question is, I'm picking on Ulrika's point about equitability. And my question is, how do you keep the supply of lifelong learning equitable? And I ask that from two perspectives. The first is our national data, I can only speak for Singapore, constantly shows that those who have benefited most from formal education are the ones also most likely to go for lifelong learning. But that's a little bit ironic, isn't it? Because we want to serve the rest of the population as well. So that's one aspect of equitability. The second aspect is across companies. So we see companies, like IKEA and so on, who really, embrace this and who provides the sort of infrastructure for the work for their workers and so on. But there are many companies, especially smaller companies, which are either not ready or too distracted with many other things to be thinking about this. How then do we do this lifelong learning to reach these other companies? So very happy to hear the panelists' views. Thank you.
Thoughts from the panel?
Well, I think number one, going back even to the first question, I think creating lifelong learning, it's often a little bit too late, not always, in university to start to think about how to create a lifelong learner. I do think national policies within the family start long before 10 to create those trajectories, those vectors, the passion for learning. But then what do we do with students who don't have that passion? I think deep personalized learning on things they care about. Make it fun, make it joyful. The example I used of the AI tutor, if I care about soccer, teach me economics through soccer. Find ways to engage me in what I'm passionate about. And I think technology can actually play a role here, but nothing can replace a great teacher.
We're down to our last few minutes, so I apologize that we weren't able to get to all the questions, but maybe we can answer some of them after the panel has formally dispersed. But I want to just take a moment to sum up what I've been hearing here. So first of all, I would like to commend all of you who are in the audience and watching online to take advantage and read WEF's great reports that have just come out on these topics, the Future of Jobs report and the Skills First report, where those slides came from. They are informative and I think will provide a great basis for further understanding of this important topic. So here's what I've heard from this conversation. Number one, we see the need for greater interconnectivity between the types of organizations that we all represent, and that we want to take the needed next steps to get connected. That's point one. Point two, we aren't saying that we need to completely disrupt the system. Rather, there's a huge opportunity to evolve and modify and reform existing systems in a way that are more responsive to current and future needs. The role of teachers to make learning come alive will always be at the forefront of how to foster lifelong learning. And I really appreciated the point in the discussion that was made because it's so contrary to what we've often heard. Lifelong learning is not adult learning. Lifelong learning is about the whole chain of learning from birth through retirement, maybe after retirement. And so it's important not only to think of work-based learning, tertiary education, professional education, but also how we develop those habits of mind in younger learners so that they can really develop a love of learning that allows them to become lifelong learners. Thank you so much for those brilliant insights, and thank you all for the engaged discussion. I hope you've enjoyed our session today, and thanks again for attending.